Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space, and a rather quick and easy card that was somewhat inspired by a Kathy Zielski card, who I think she was inspired by Aurora Basson card. So basically, we're at like craftception, cardception. I don't know what to call it. You know, sometimes it's just the inspiration gets diluted and diluted and diluted, and more often than not, I don't remember. But this Kathy's card stuck in my head. Laura's card, they're both phenomenal card makers. I love their work. And yeah, I needed to make a card for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge, and used the inspiration, pulled out some wafer dies, a little embossing folder, and kind of did, again, like my sort of version of sort of clean and simple. So we'll see. Keep watching. I'll show you guys how I made it. And then, as always, links to all the things are in the description box below. For the Color Throwdown Challenge, for those that aren't aware, it's just a weekly challenge just for fun. I will have a link to it in my blog post, which is linked below, so you can check it out from there and play along if you like. It's open to everyone. And then, yeah, keep watching. I'll show you guys how I made it. So I'm using the Aurora Blooms wafer die set that came out a couple months ago, I think. As always, my sense of time is off. However, I'm only using like a couple of the wafer dies from the set. It's actually an enormous die set, and I did a video closer to when it came out, and I will link that in the end screen at the end of this one, because I used most of the dies from that set and did, like, you know, ink splattery, smushy, really intense cards. You guys, you know, threw everything but the kitchen sink at them, sort of a thing. So this is a deviation from that. I only used a few dies, which, funny enough, and this is why I always say I have so much respect for those that do clean and simple card making like all the time. While this card is on the simple side, I lost track of how long I spent narrowing down how many wafer dies I was going to use. Because it's like, I love them all, you know. So anyway, I die cut scraps of cardstock, set them aside. I then took a piece of Neenah Desert Storm cardstock, just my go-to fave for craft cardstock. I misted it with water, which just softens the paper fibers when you want to use embossing folders, and it gives you a better impression, and it also helps prevent cracking. With an embossing folder like this, I'm not worried about cracking like at all, because it doesn't create like a super deep impression, but it still gives you a better impression. And I discussed this in another video, but this is the sandwich I figured out that works with specifically the Rainbow Splash embossing folders and the Griffin EMPRESS machine. So that's what I did. Ran that through the machine, embossed the cardstock, and then I grabbed a scrap of vellum and I put it in my MISTI, and I'm using the CZ Design Noted Heart stamp set. I really like this heart shape with like the notebook paper on it. It's really cute, and the sentiments are really cute too, which I didn't use for the front of the card, but I actually ended up using some of it on the inside of the card just because I liked them so much. So I used the anti-static powder on my vellum that just prevents the embossing powder from clinging to anything other than the stamped image, and then I stamped it with clear embossing ink, coated it with Simon's Detail White embossing powder. Gonna melt that with my heat tool, which goes very quickly because vellum is thin, so the heat passes through. It takes a fraction of the time. Even with me speeding up the video, in real life time, it takes almost no time to emboss on vellum. So after I embossed it, I used the coordinating little wafer die to die cut this. And then for the sentiment for the front of the card, I'm using the sentiment strip pack from Simon, the Grateful and Thankful, which I have repurchased. I forget when these came out. Like, they've been out for forever, but I use them so much that I've repurchased it a couple times at least. So I trimmed that, just the basic thank you sentiment from it. And I also trimmed down my embossed background. And then I grabbed some twine from my stash. So I don't have a link for this one. This is some old doodle twine in bubble blue. It was the right shade of blue, because blue is a color I don't use very often, even though I love it. I love all the colors. You guys know I love a rainbow of colors. Anyway, wrapped the twine around, used my reverse tweezers, tied it in a bow, did a bit of fiddling. And then to start attaching everything, I'm going to use some thin foam squares to attach that sentiment to the vellum heart. And then before I start really assembling things, I need to get these, just the flower pieces together. And yeah, they're a set like this, and I think I mentioned it in the other video when I used this Aurora blooms set. You can kind of mix and match and do whatever you want to create the blooms themselves. And that's also why it took me a while, because I was just like, ooh, I could make this one, I could make this one. So yeah, like limiting it is hard. It's hard. It is difficult. I struggled. Anyway, I adhered almost everything to this vellum heart with just little bits of craft tacky glue. Just kind of tucking things in before the glue had a chance to dry. And then, yeah, I figured out kind of my little cluster here. I've kind of talked about this before. Floral arrangements are not my forte. I'm getting a little more comfortable with it. With this one, it just worked. Probably because I limited how many wafer dies I used and how many I cut out. Shocking how that works. So after I got them adhered, I then, to adhere this to that background, I'm hiding the little foam squares kind of behind all these die cuts so that you can't see them, because otherwise you would see them through the vellum. So I just stuck them behind the sentiment and behind the little die cut florals and leaves. And then I was able to kind of tuck this into place and press it into place on that little background, and then realized I didn't adhere that last little flower, so that I just popped up with a foam square too. So then on the inside of the card, my card base is a top folding A2 white note card. So I stamped that notebook paper heart with some positively saturated ink. I used Latte for the heart, and then I took a couple of the sentiments from the set and I stamped those with just VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink. And yeah, there's just some really good little sentiments. Like these would also be really cute to do. I was thinking like little like lunchbox notes, things like that. Like you could stamp out a bunch of them, die cut a bunch of them, you know, stamp them, stamp the sentiments, etc., and just kind of tuck them into things. It's just a cute little set. Like, you know, Kathy Zielski and her thought process and just stamp sets and sentiments. Love it. Anyway, after I stamp the sentiments, there's little hearts in the set, little solid ones and outline ones, and you can use those almost like little check boxes, you know? So I stamped one right next to that little sub sentiment there, and for that I was using Marine Positively Saturated ink, and then I also pulled out Perfection Positively Saturated ink. And for this I just used an acrylic block because it is way faster and easier with small images like this to just stamp them freehand, you know, versus lining them up in a stamp positioner. So after I had the inside stamped, I'm going to adhere my card front with Big Mama foam tape. So that'll give it a little more dimension. I've mentioned this before. When I do go more clean and simple, I usually kind of go a little harder with the dimension, like foam tape, foam squares, etc., because I think it just adds that extra something. So pop that into place and then got that adhered to my card base. And then I dug through my stash and actually pulled out some enamel dots, which I have been hoarding for a very long time. I'm slowly making progress on actually using some of the things. Anyway, I pulled these out because they had some white enamel dots and just kind of stuck them and decided to use them as the flower centers. So I didn't need to die cut them in the end, but this was a last, you know, minute decision. So stuck those onto the card and that finished it off. So I've got, you know, the die cutting with the debossing and then the embossing from the folder, the heat embossing on the vellum. I love vellum. And then the inside just kind of finishes off. So like I mentioned in the intro, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. In the blog post, there'll be a link to the Color Throwdown Challenge. I'll have a supply list. I'll link to all the supplies I use, so you can just expand the description box if you're interested. I'll link to that other video along with a couple others in the end screen for you to check out if you missed them. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.